the challenges with getting people to participate in an enterprise 2.0 or learning 2.0 environment. And I'm not using those words interchangeably. I know they're distinctly different.
And Leva is a university professor in Belgium.
Excellent. Well, I'm certainly not trying to point people to a blog that I posted, but here's what I did blog about a couple weeks ago. It was a two-part blog. It was called, at first, Lurking is Learning. And then the second follow-up was Learning is Lurking. And so what I effectively meant by that was in society today, whether you're at higher ed, whether you're K-12, whether organizations, whether you're not-for-profits, I think we're all different types of learners. We still have different learning styles. So yeah, we all got shepherded into the classrooms, but think about those classrooms. Don't you recall that there was always sort of the chap or the gal who would answer all the questions? Don't you remember that there was always those people who sat at the back of the room, kind of goofing off? And don't you remember those people who were fastidiously taking notes the entire time that the sage on the stage was talking? That meant that there are different types of learning styles. Some people emote, some people lurk, and some people goof off and process later. We really have to recognize that even though we do want it to be sort of more collaborative and over time seeing much more engagement with the user, frankly, the matter is that when people are lurking in environments, in fact, they're learning because that's their style. And over time, I think we have still some opportunity to help them get over that, well, how do I start actually discussing or contributing or putting my opinion out there as much as we did in the classroom. And then conversely, I think there's, when I say learning is lurking, I think folks that are much more aggressive in their comments and like sort of want to be the the me, like look at me syndrome. They need a lesson in how to scale back some of that and to reach out directly to help people with their apprehension to actually get online and ultimately contributing. I don't know if that helps a bit, Terrence.
Apparently for the comment, and I also posted the link to that blog post in the chat window too. So I encourage everybody to go check that out. That's a two-part blog post as well. And I'm finding too in many times in professional organizations too that are supposed to be at the forefront of Learning 2.0. There still is a bit of a challenge to even get the members of those organizations, I'll leave names out, to participate
come on, tell us
in
names.
Learning 2.0.
Well, let's answer Bill Cush's question here, or comment, right? He says, hoarding knowledge and information is prevalent in corporate world too, challenge to 2.0 world. So the way that I'll sort of take that response or that anecdote is that I don't disagree. And if you think about, first of all, I'll answer this in two parts, or sort of get the discussion going in two parts. Everyone should be familiar with, how's this going?
Yep, I think
The technology adoption curve shows that there are individuals who are at the bleeding edge. I need everything that's new and up to date, and I'm going to dive in heads first because I have gumption, I have bravado, and I'm going to do this because that's just my DNA. And then on the far hand side of the adoption curve, we have sort of reading edge. And the reading edge people are those that are very tentative. They're not there yet at all in terms of the adoption of technology. Now let's take that same example inside of an organization when it comes to Bill's point about hoarding knowledge and sort of the information composition of keeping or in fiefdoms, what have you. That actually comes full circle to my point that there's three legs of this transformation stool. So we've talked a bit about Enterprise 2.0, where you need those technologies first and foremost. Then you talked about Learning 2.0, so that's the transformation of learning from always in a classroom or always formal to formal, informal, social. But let's think about leadership, so a new leadership style for organizations. We really need to get ahead of the curve with some of our organizations to say, you know what? There are better ways in which to lead. And first and foremost, leadership is for all. And so if you're building your a leadership model that's much more collaborative, that's much more open, that's transparent, that's connecting dots to people, that's saying, look, it's okay to share, it's encouraged. And all of those different pieces that allow it, again, eventually, if I go back to my adoption curve model, it will be a better place for all of us. But we can't, as professionals, expect that everyone's going to be using the technology first, that everyone's going to be using Learning 2.0 first, and that if you don't have a leadership model that's that way, that everyone's going to be using sort of that leadership model. You have to really think about it, to me, in all three veins.
And it's a good point too, because the sharing part is really important, and yet you have a lot of people who refuse to share. It's like you said, it's in their DNA. It's whatever it might. They're either shy or they just don't want to share, or they have their own agendas. So that's there's always going to be that human factor of not everybody's going to go, no matter how much the organization may model that sharing or that sharing concept, or they try to encourage it. There's still a lot of organizations, probably a large majority, that don't really want that much sharing. They want a certain amount of sharing, but at certain levels. And we still see that in most of the large companies. A little bit different in smaller to mid-sized companies because there's a more entrepreneurial sense. But in the larger companies, it's much more process-driven, where all of a sudden, unless we incorporate process into the share, into the sharing into the process, it happens less and less, unless, of course, you have an individual who likes to share. Do you have any ideas on that one?
Yeah, I do. And again, it's a wonder. This is just wonderful chatting about this with you two. Because you're right, you can't just, I call it the spaghetti test. So you can't just throw up some spaghetti on the fridge and hope that it sticks for an organization. If we all espouse Learning 2.0, if we all espouse Enterprise 2.0, and a new leadership model, and just say, here you go, don't forget to turn the lights off when you leave the room, how the hell is that going to work? So you're dead right, Rick. You have to find ways in which to embed this into the vernacular, into the culture, into your work processes. And if you're not, then again, it just becomes what I call sort of an SOS, or shiny object syndrome. And, that might be tongue-in-cheek a bit, but there's no way in which to actually, allow this thing to happen appropriately unless you find ways in which to embed it. So, no particular example here that's better than the other, but I'll just bring up a couple. So let's say that you were looking to launch a coaching model for your organization. So would you launch a coaching model that is separate, segregated, different from the way in which that you're bringing about a leadership model, Enterprise 2.0 and Learning 2.0 to life? Would it be this sort of self-contained event that isn't, as I say, interwoven into the things that you espouse to help change that more collaborative, open, sharing culture?
No, you'd want it consistent.
Exactly. So why, go hire a separate consulting firm to build you a coaching model unless you've already decided what your leadership framework should be, what your learning vision is, and how you're going to use the technologies to allow that to happen. There's one example. Another one is, let's say, you need some help with career development at your company. So your employees are saying, look, I'm okay in my career, but I don't know where to go next. So I don't have any help. Well, let's say you're building out some sort of career help center. Well, when you build out that career help center, for example, is that center going to be part formal, part informal, part social? Will you use some of the 2.0 technologies? And then how does that look when you sort of may have said, well, we better build out this career development framework such that it employs a leadership model that, again, is much more open and transparent and collaborative, so that people, for example, would be sharing their career stories. Maybe they want to go record themselves with a 5-minute video and put that up inside of a career center, if you're following me, right? So just two examples that are pretty real for everyone, whether it's coaching and career development, that you can employ the model itself.
That's a great idea. Actually, I hadn't thought about that. But to use that technology, for example, for somebody inside a company who wants to move to different areas, record a little video, audio interview. That's actually really clever. Yeah, take advantage of the technology that's out there.
Yeah.
In one of your more recent blog posts, you had stated something which kind of resonated for me, and it's that business really hasn't changed. We've always been social. There's always been social business. It's just now with the media that access to that social aspect of our business now just becomes exponential. And I think that that's such a key ingredient in helping people realize that in many ways, these social tools are not asking you to do anything that you haven't been doing for your entire life. They're simply allowing you to do it easier, faster, and across borders that you couldn't have done in the past.
I mean, I couldn't say it any better, Terrence. That's exactly it. But one of the problems I think is many of us, and I am guilty at this, is we're all, this is nascent times, right? So this really has started to take off the last 3 years or so. And much like we were, as I mentioned before, we put an E in front of everything 15, 20 years ago. Now we're putting, a 2.0 at the end of everything, or a social at the beginning of everything.
Unless you're Apple, in which case you put an I in front of everything, and probably a 4.0 because they're so much better.
Fair enough.
I had to get our Apple rant in there, but
you're not pulling me in again on that one, Rick.
Yeah, I wonder
The
if they
crowds
have a
have finally
patent to
dispersed outside my window.
I was just wondering if they have a patent to the eyeball.
the eyeball, yeah. As long as it's not flash, they're happy.
So I noticed here someone were asking about lurking. Maybe I'll come back to that for a second. Lurking, as I mentioned, it's kind of an important part to the puzzle. So I'll go back to those examples. Like, let's use the career sort of center. I don't think an expectation of everyone at the organization is that they will contribute to that portal. So you're going to have a lot of employees in your organization. They're going to be like hanging out at the career portal and looking at stuff, just reading it and digesting it. That to me is what a lurker is. And it's not meant to be a pejorative or negative term. It's just sort of an online term where someone is reading, really. Let's just call it that. But it's a very important part. It's just that, as I've mentioned with the technology adoption curve, we'd like to get lurkers contributing more over time. But this is a marathon, not a Usain Bolt 100-meter dash. We're really going to have to work on this over the course of that marathon.
Well, yeah, and the lurkers love the anonymity more often than not. They want to be involved, but they're a little afraid. So they just kind of watch from a distance. It's funny. I have a theory that the biggest lurkers are probably the managers who aren't quite sure what to do with all this stuff, and they just want to kind of, let's keep an eye on it, see what's going on, and, somebody saw me. There's still a lot of the old-style management technique that the manager is supposed to know more than everybody, and as a result, they're nervous when they don't. So, of course, you've got all the new technologies, you've got new training, you've got communities building, you've got Twitter, Facebook, whatever, and the manager all of a sudden turns into more of a coach, into more of an organizer than they do a straight-out leader, though sometimes a leader is required to act in different ways. So I think until we can also get the managers into the fold, it's not going to trickle down quite as well to everybody else, though you never know. Obviously, we're seeing massive changes in, like you said, the last 3 years, and more coming. Only more are going to come.
Oh, and that's just it, right? I mean, we are at. I've said this before. I think it's sort of using a Churchillian quote. It's sort of the end of the beginning, right? And so if we're at the bleeding edge of change for what is this kind of technology curve, or the combination of Learning 2.0 with Enterprise 2.0, we really all have to recognize this as leaders and take charge, back to the Gretzky analogy.
Can you think of any companies, let's say e-learning companies, that are spearheading e-learning 2.0? The Adobes, the Articulates, anybody else that you can think of that may be pushing forward to make 2.0 a little bit more of a reality rather than just a moniker?
Yeah, I've got a few, and I mean,